Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say that, what we just witnessed in the House today is I think, disturbing breakdown in the unity that we've seen among all political parties in this province as we stand together with every Ontarian to fight against the COVID 19 pandemic. And this crisis is far from over. And we as legislators have a responsibility to, of course, have our partisan differences, but to set them aside so that we can be a good example to the people of Ontario about how we're all working together to address this crisis. And so I'm urging all my colleagues from all political parties to tone down the partisanship and to build unity, collaboration, and cooperation, because that's what the people of Ontario want us to do while we are addressing this extraordinary crisis at this extraordinary time. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Your first question comes from David Haynes with Queen's Park Briefing. Please go ahead.
Hi there, Mike. What do you think that the government has to do in order to regain public confidence for the long-term care system?
Well, first of all, I think the government should just admit the fact that we need to have an independent public inquiry so we can put that debate behind us and focus on what we need to do right now to address the crisis in long-term care. I think we need to expand the number of homes that the government takes over. I would say any home that has a massive outbreak should have a government takeover. Given just the tragic and gut-wrenching report we saw from the Canadian military on those 5 homes, suggests that possibility of having additional homes in that situation is a real possibility. And we need to ensure that any home that has a significant outbreak, the government takes over and we send in reinforcements, whether it's hospital staff, Canadian military staff, etc. Secondly, we need to do proactive inspections. Right now, the fact that we only saw 9 inspections last year that was proactively done on site is unacceptable. And given what we saw in the report yesterday, the government needs to be proactively inspecting our long-term care homes. And then finally, we have to make sure that staff in long-term care facilities have the PPE they need, have the staffing ratios they need, have the number of RN to patient ratios that are necessary to keep staff and residents safe.
So when it comes to Minister Fullerton, do you have confidence that she can turn it around, or does she need to step down?
I really don't want to play political games right now with, the old standard, demand the minister's resignation. Right now, let's fix the problem. And I think all parties have a role to play in pushing the government to address the concerns in long-term care, put ideas on the table, let people know what our constituents are telling them. And the government, quite frankly, has an obligation to engage the opposition right now in those conversations, because the people of Ontario expect us to work together to solve this crisis, not to play political games with it right now.
Your next question comes from Rob Ferguson with the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mike. Excuse me. Just wondering, the word is leaking out that the government's going to announce a new inspection regime at 145. We don't really know any details right now, but is that enough?
Well, Rob, until we see the details, we're not going to know. But we need a proactive inspection regime. It is obvious that only having 9 inspections last year was completely unacceptable. So as I said in the answer to the previous question, we need to take over any homes that are having a significant outbreak, and whether that's with hospital staff, whether that's bringing in military, etc. but we also need to have a proactive inspection regime going into all long-term care facilities to ensure that we don't have a repeat of what we've seen in these 5 particular facilities that were in the report yesterday.
Okay, and we've asked the government this, so I'll ask you this, Mike. There are 175 nursing home inspectors. There are 626 nursing homes. That's fewer than 4 homes per inspector. How is it that the military knows what's going on, but the Ontario nursing home inspectors don't?
Yeah, Rob, that's a good question. And the minister and the premier need to be held accountable for answering that question. The fact that we don't have enough inspectors doing enough inspections was a mistake the government made. And it was based on an Auditor General's report. And, quite frankly, an Auditor General's job is to do value for money audits. A long-term care inspector's job is to ensure that our elders are being cared for with dignity and respect. Those are 2 very different functions, and we need to be prioritizing care over profits, and we need to be prioritizing care over financial considerations right now and in any time. That's what our elders deserve. That's the dignity and care they deserve. And so I think the government, one, needs to be held accountable for an inspection regime that doesn't work. And today they need to announce a plan that's going to overhaul that and fix the problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, should you have any questions, please press star 1. If you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before pressing any keys. Your next question comes from Alisher Sharp with National Observer. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Schreiner. I've got the same question or a similar line of questioning that I put to Mr. Fraser about the changes to tenancy law that just got moved a little further through the process. What can be done in your mind at committee, or what changes should or could be made to that legislation in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the chaos that that's throwing into the housing sector?
So, Alisher, there's some feedback on the line there. So I think I heard your question, but I think it's related to Bill 184 and the tenant evictions and what could be changed in that bill. I think that was the question. So first of all, a lot of tenant advocacy groups are worried that there are provisions in the bill that will make it easier for landlords to evict tenants and to do it more quickly. And we're at a time right now where, facilitating the evictions of people who potentially should be self-isolating and quarantining themselves during a pandemic, to me, it's just an inappropriate piece of legislation to introduce at this time. And I think in general, it's wrong to facilitate evictions anyway. That being said, my hope is at committee we can fix the bill, because there are problems that both tenants and landlords experience with the way the tribunal works, with the way rent evictions work, etc., that need to be fixed. That's an issue that comes up in my constituency office all the time. But I think it's going to be highly difficult for us to address those concerns while we're facing a pandemic. We should be focused right now on legislation that is directly related to the COVID-19 crisis, how we address the crisis, and what we need to do to recover and reopen our communities and our economy. And this legislation doesn't meet that standard. And so I think it's something that should be delayed into the fall, and we should be focused right now on COVID-19 specific legislation, and legislation that will help our communities and our businesses recover and reopen in a way that's safe. And this legislation doesn't do that. How we address the crisis.
Just as a follow-up, are there specific changes that you would look to have included in this bill, given that we're in a different situation now, coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think specifically the changes I'm looking for are the schedules in the bill that will allow landlords to evict tenants more rapidly and more quickly without going to the tribunal. I think that needs to be addressed because we need to make sure we have proper protections in place.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a final reminder, if you have any questions, please press star 1. There are no further questions at this time.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Be safe.